Hi everyone, welcome. It's so great to have you all here today. Good evening and welcome to the Community Environmental Council's Environmental Hub, brand new. I'm M. Johnson. I'm the Director of Climate Resilience here at CEC. And we've only been open for about a month, so it's really great to see you all today. And this is our first event where we are trying out all of the technical gadgets. So we are virtual today. We have attendees on Zoom. We are also recording this event. So it's going to be a lesson learning session, so please bear with us. So we'll just start off by acknowledging that this meeting is taking place here in what's known as California, home to nearly 200 tribal nations. We acknowledge and honor the original inhabitants of many regions, and we are gathered right now on Chumash land. And as you may know, the Community Environmental Council has created the environmental solutions in our region since 1970. Our current focus is rapid and equitable solutions to the climate crisis. And lastly, I'll just mention that the hub itself has 10,000 square feet of innovative and collaborative space right here in the heart of downtown Santa Barbara. The Community Environmental Council has a proven reputation of building collective power to test, incubate, and scale community-led solutions to complex problems for more than 5 decades. And we designed this space with the ultimate renewable resource, human ingenuity and creativity in mind. This photo is of our CEC team at our grand opening last month in July, and we are very excited to be working here in this collaborative hub and hosting events like this with partnerships like we have here today. So I'll go ahead and introduce Rich Applebaum, who's here with us today and moderating our agenda. So you can see we'll be going through presentations with our panel leaders here, followed by question and answer. Rich.
Thank you, Em. So I am Rich Applebaum, indeed, a board member of the Santa Barbara Great Panthers. And before I talk about tonight's evening, how about giving a shout out to M. Johnson and CEC for this amazing space and this amazing event. I mean, this is just a truly invaluable resource for our community. And I understand that if you're with nonprofits, there are spaces that can be leased out for use. Weddings, bar mitzvahs, whatever. Anyhow, thank you so much. So first, let me say a little word about the Great Panthers, which organize this event. We're called Great Panthers because we are gray and elderly, and that is why we chose to have this forum looking at this specific topic, the effect of heat on the elderly. The motto of the Great Panthers is to educate, advocate, and agitate. And one of the hopes I have for this evening is that all the panelists and people from the audience will suggest things that can be done. This is informational, but every informational event, I think, should lead to some concrete result. Our local Santa Barbara chapter of the Great Panthers, there's been a national organization around, I think, since the 1960s, was formed November 2020. And we have many members. I won't mention them here, but our board includes former supervisors, mayors, heads of various activist groups, and so on. So the Great Panthers really does bring a lot of, I think, experience to these forums that we host. Channeling the late Congressman John Lewis, we try to make good trouble, and hopefully that's what this will be. So there's a sign-up table there, which you can go to. You can go to our website also and sign up. We urge you to become a member. That way you will learn about events that are happening, that we're sponsoring, and you can attend our annual meeting where we kind of plan the coming year. And I'll also make a plug for another organization, since I have the microphone, Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice, or CLU, which is a consortium of representatives of faith-based communities that tries to take these issues and reach out to the various religious organizations in Santa Barbara and involve them. And I'm on the board of CLU also, and we have a table right over there that you can check out. And I want to thank also, of course, the Society of Fearless Grandmothers, who are fearless but not frightening, and the Governor's Office of Community Partnerships and Strategic Communications, and we'll hear from you shortly. So let me just give a very brief rundown of tonight. The format is simple. We have 4 presentations. Each will have 10 minutes. That'll be followed then by 10 minutes of discussion among the panelists, which I'll moderate. Then we'll open it to the floor and to the, I think, more than 100 people who registered out in Zoom land. And the questions will be announced, or you'll ask your own questions, as Em said. And just one suggestion, please ask questions of the panel. Avoid making long speeches. We only have a half hour. We'd like to hear from as many of you as possible. So with that, shall I introduce the panelists? That's page 2 here. Our first panelist is Dr. David LaBelle over there on the far right. David, in addition to being an emergency medicine specialist for over 30 years, is also a close personal friend for over 30 years. And he retired from his practice several years ago. So Dr. LaBelle, David, works on social, political, and environmentally related medical issues, but he also has a passion for brain research and pretty much anything that affects health and happiness and how to optimize it. And in fact, he was one of the speakers in a forum that the Great Panthers hosted, I think about 3 weeks ago. So let's welcome Dr. David LaBelle.
Thanks, Rich. I feel a little uneasy without my phone, but I can handle it. Thank you for having me. When we first conceived of this talk, it seemed like it would be a low-key informational presentation, but it's a hot topic. And I quickly learned we're facing an ominous combination of issues, extreme heat plus the possibility of power outages, that puts us at a much higher risk for serious personal danger and potential community disaster. Heat is already the #1 environmental killer. Adding a power failure to extreme heat more than doubles the number of people at risk. It warrants our urgent attention and intervention as individuals and community leaders. I've been hearing this quote a few times recently. This may be the coolest summer for the rest of our lives. It's only going to get riskier. So here's a quick overview of things we should be aware of about heat's impact on the elderly and some ideas to start a conversation about what we can do about it. I do want to mention, even though this is focused on heat, on the elderly, other groups are particularly vulnerable to heat, such as the young, the homeless, those with serious medical or mental conditions, and the poor. While much of what we'll discuss applies to them, our main focus today is on the elderly and their particular strengths and weaknesses. Why are the elderly more vulnerable to heat and heat emergencies? Many have medical conditions, such as heart disease, or are on medication that make them vulnerable. But overall, as we get older, our cooling mechanism becomes less effective. In a heat emergency, some degree of physical and mental agility gives you a better chance of surviving, and heat makes this harder. What makes a heat emergency worse? Extreme heat, multiple days of heat, and heat at night that makes it hard for us to recover. Some of the danger signs of heat illness, we're pretty familiar with the typical symptoms where you feel hot, dizzy, nauseated, but it becomes very concerning when someone begins developing confusion or profound weakness. If someone you are with in a hot environment starts acting confused, you need to address it, cool them down, and or call for help. It's harder to judge if you are getting confused. If you suspect it, call for help before it's too late, before you can't figure out how to use your cell phone. Dehydration goes hand in hand with heat illness. You need to be drinking plenty of fluids. There are pitfalls in dealing with heat exposure, mainly that it's so insidious and gradual. If you fall and you injure your arm or you get chest pain, you know to act. But a condition in which things are gradually getting worse, it's harder to know when to ask for help. It's kind of like the experiment with frogs in boiling water. If you put a frog in boiling water, they'll do everything they can to get out, but if you put them in water and gradually heat the water, they'll boil to death. Common stories I heard in the ER from patients suffering from heat injury, they'd say things like, "It was much hotter yesterday, so I thought today would be no problem." Remember, heat has a cumulative impact, especially with hot nights. Or they'd say, "It occurred to me I should drink more fluids, but then the prospect of getting up later to go to the bathroom seemed too much." Don't find yourself making these excuses to yourself. How do we treat or avoid heat illness? Cool down. It's that simple, but it's not always easy. Air conditioning saves lives. At certain temperatures and humidity, fans stop working. Cooling in water can help for a while, but it's hard to do all night. Air conditioning is the key. It's sadly ironic that we need to use power to save ourselves when generating that power is contributing to the heat in the first place. But air conditioning can keep us from getting heat illness, which is why losing electricity can be so deadly. In an extreme heat emergency, the key to survival is to find some place that has working air conditioning. A friend or a relative with backup power, a cooling center, someplace you can cool down. A heat emergency can cause a lot of death and illness on its own. Power outages amplify the impacts of a heat emergency. If 50% of homes have air conditioning, when the electricity goes off, we've doubled the number of people at risk. In terms of trying to rescue people, many older people could be at home quietly baking. Don't mean cookies. And we wouldn't know where they are and who's actually getting into trouble. In our community, a combination of a heat wave and a power outage could present a large-scale tragedy. So this combination of articles is kind of, in my mind, a wake-up call. The scientific behind the headlines modeled what could happen based on the temperature, the percentage of the population over 65, and the percentage of homes with air conditioning. These are the factors that determine how bad a heat crisis becomes. In Phoenix, 96% of the homes have air conditioning. In the summer, with its extreme heat, Phoenix, without electricity, it's uninhabitable. In Santa Barbara, we're vulnerable because we're not used to extreme heat, and we have much fewer air conditionings. We're like the Northwest or Northern Europe last year, areas where large numbers of mainly older people died from extreme heat in areas unprepared for it. Our response has to include more air conditioning and more reliable electricity. How do we protect ourselves? Leave. If there's a big heat wave coming, consider leaving. When a hurricane bears down, there's all these maps showing it approaching, and you're given warning, and a lot of people who feel they could be overwhelmed or don't want to deal with it evacuate. An interesting idea that has popped up is the idea of naming heat waves like they name hurricanes. Heat wave Katrina is more concrete and actionable than multiple days of high temperature. What can we do as individuals? We need to plan ahead, create a network with family, friends who can help. Consider getting a backup battery, backup generator. It could be a lifesaver. A backup battery or generator runs out of juice usually after a day or so, and blackouts can theoretically start to last for days. But with solar panels connected to a backup battery, you can keep generating usable electricity. It's effective, but expensive. Could local government, the state, help, especially for low-income people? Here's a potential win-win. Get an electric vehicle and reduce carbon emissions, and it provides a backup battery. If you can charge your electric vehicle with solar panels, you'd be set. Whatever your backup, keep in mind it can rescue more than a household. It can create a haven for other family members and neighbors. What do we do as a community? Households that currently have or decide to get a backup power system to run an air conditioning can serve as a small hub to help other neighbors. This is something I actually learned from Gray Panthers, that neighbors can meet with neighbors and other neighborhoods to band together to come up with solutions. Is there, if we can formally or informally organize neighborhood cooling pods, is there a governmental or non-governmental entity that could help support this? What can local government do? I wouldn't expect solutions at this early stage, although a disaster could be as soon as the next heat wave. But we should expect an acknowledgement of the urgency of the problem and a commitment that our political leaders are prioritizing coming up with solutions to mitigate the risk of power failures in conjunction with extreme heat, along with other issues. In the meantime, here are a couple thoughts on some things that government could help us address. Right now, if you have a medical condition like sleep apnea that requires a medical device that needs electricity, you can frequently get a free or subsidized backup battery. Can we expand this program or create something similar that helps elderly get backup batteries that will protect them if there's a blackout? Who can help with this? I should know this, but I don't. Do nursing homes have backup power? Residential facilities? There are so many facets to address. Is there someone in local government who could coordinate an effective, coherent, protective response? Some sort of a heat czar? I think we'll hear more about this. And we have a procedure in place, Public Safety Power Shutoffs, PSPS, in which the power companies turns off the electricity in hot, windy days to try to prevent their equipment from starting a wildfire. This is potentially vitally important, but under certain circumstances, many more people could perish because of the heat emergency and the purposeful cutting off of power than from the potential of wildfire. Nobody wants a wildfire, but somebody needs to be able to assess and balance these competing life-threatening priorities, fire risk versus heat risk. I've heard conflicting rumors about whether the Office of Emergency Management or Southern California, Edison, has final say over keeping the electricity on in a heat emergency. Who would we rather have make that decision? Maybe the powers that be can help clarify this before a crisis. It's challenging. A hot, dry sundowner winds kick up in the evening just when we need to power on our air conditionings to cool us down at night. There's a bigger picture here. Up until now, we've been focused on trying to prevent climate change. Now, in addition to preventing, we have to put our energies into actively defending ourselves from the direct, deadly impacts of climate change on a large scale. It's kind of a paradigm shift. What I'm recommending, more batteries, more electricity, more air conditioning, is antithetical to how we've been trying to deal with climate change up until now. But we have to find ways to protect ourselves, our family, and our community. Our most serious risk right now, in my view, is heat wave and power failure. I can sound an alarm, but we have to solve this. I'm in a room full of concerned people and activists. I'm asking you, what do we do? What's the game plan? We're all in this together, and it's getting hot out there. Thanks.
Thank you, David. I have only one recommendation. Instead of naming heat waves with women's names like Katrina, how about Donald, Rudy, a few other indicted people? I'll just say on a personal note, my wife Karen here and I just got back from a week in Florida, visiting my daughter, Southwest Florida. It was in the high 90s every day. It has been for a month. The heat index was 120, and that is lethal. And just to reinforce something that David just said, our population is aging, and older people are moving to the Sun Belt. This is a recipe for national disaster. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Yumi Sarah, who is appointed by Governor Newsom to be the inaugural, that is the first executive director of the Office of Community Partnerships and Strategic Communications within the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. She's responsible for leading a dedicated state team that manages California's highest priority public awareness and community outreach efforts, such as extreme heat, water conservation, and COVID vaccinations. Yumi has over 30 years of experience in developing grant programs, cross-sectoral partnerships, and strategic frameworks. Let's give a warm Santa Barbara welcome to Yumi Sarah.
Good afternoon. How is everybody? Is the mic okay? Yep. And for Zoom folks, the mic is okay, I assume? All right, great. You know, as I was sitting here, just looking out at the audience, it just kind of gave me these sort of thrills and chills at the same time, because it's like you've been here fighting the fight for a very, very long time, with the Gray Panthers and with all of these groups, with the CC. I mean, since 1960, that's a very long time. I know that because that's about the time I was born. So, but so really, thank you so much for helping to save the planet, and hopefully we will be able to support your efforts in some way as well. We the next generation, or well, I'm not quite the next generation, but we this generation, and also us coming from the state. But before I talked about the office, I kind of wanted to bring my mother into the room. My mom retired in Goleta. And so my sister went to UCSB, so I used to come back to Goleta to visit her. Very independent woman. She was a single mom, worked at the U.S. State Department, so I got to travel all over. So she came back here, and we tried to, this is a beautiful place. We tried to keep her here as long as possible until she had Alzheimer's, and then we just had to move her. But I was as I came here, I was also thinking about her, because I was like, now Mom will probably be in this room because she would want to like hang out with people, and what would she want to hear from somebody like me? What would she want to hear from me, right? And so as I wrote sort of my talking points last night, I was like, well, the people in the room probably know a lot more than I already do. How to protect yourself from heat and all of this. And so I just wanted to talk a little bit about my role at the state, our extreme heat campaign, how we define heat, and our vulnerable communities. And I had all of these points on taking action to stay cool, but I think you already know that, so I'm going to skip over that. I also came from the environmental movement. It was the Earth Summit in 1992 in Rio that really galvanized some of the work that I did with youth and environmental action. So really good to see the movement sort of continue as well, right? And I really wanted to also leave here with a sense of extending our hand from the state to you here in your communities, just so that we can all work together in order to really combat this climate change, the impact of climate change, especially on our most vulnerable communities. I was just last week. I was at the governor's office, and in the room they were talking about the state's master plan for aging. Has anybody? Did you all participate in that? Would be really great. It's already done, but some of these plans have a lot of stakeholder involvement, from communities to input. It's couple of things that was said was like, by 2030, 10.8 million Californians will be an older adult that's over 60, and making up 1/4 of the state's population. Also last week we did a disability training, and there I learned that 1 in 4 adults have a disability or access and functional need. So California is an aging population. And so we do need to figure this out, how to go about making sure that our older adults in the population stay safe and also live a life of dignity. Just about our campaign. So as you've heard, we've got a few heat waves coming, driven by climate crisis, and we launched what's called the Heat Ready CA campaign, along with the heatreadyca.com website. It's the nation's first statewide, or one of the first that we know of, statewide multi-ethnic awareness and education campaign. And it's designed specifically to keep Californians safe during extreme heat. We've got, the groups that we're really targeting or that we're focusing on are those who are most at risk, 65 years of age or older, workers, individuals with chronic illness, individuals with disabilities, those who are pregnant. And we also have, in the state of California, we also have an extreme heat action plan. And so we're looking at it as an all-government approach where each of our office belongs to the Office of Planning and Research. And so it's all of these offices doing their part to work on this issue as well as other issues of importance. We are a newly established office, just 1 year old. Happy birthday to us! What we're tasked to do is really to manage the state's high priority issues, and this might be heat now. It was COVID. And we were born out of our Census 2020 campaign, and I know Santa Barbara was this area was very active in supporting the real community-based sort of movement to support the census as well, to get us counted. But with this Heat Ready Heat Ready California campaign, we have funded over 100 community-based organizations all over the state, and we call this our Trusted Messenger Network. So what we believe and what we've seen in our vaccination campaign as well as our census campaigns is that really the best way to reach people, your neighbors, your family, your friends, is really to go through our trusted messengers, who are often the community-based organizations, small ones as well as large ones. And so we've got people knocking on doors, leafleting, just like any old campaign, and really talking to people one-on-one, eye-to-eye, to make sure that people understand and stay safe, healthy, whether it be to get a vaccine or whether it be to stay safe when it gets hot. We also pride ourselves in being accessible in terms of languages as well. So many of our community-based organizations also provide materials. We work with ethnic media to reach as many people in the different languages as possible. Am I over 10? Because my alarm my timer just stopped, so okay. You already defined extreme heat and our vulnerable population, and I think I just wanted to echo what you were saying about how to do this, taking action, because sometimes we just can't wait for others to help us, and I know a little bit about who you are, the fearless grandmothers and the great Panthers, but just I think that, again, if I bring my mother into the room and I think about her, who lived alone, used to walk on the bluffs and in the monarch butterfly groves, and just worrying because her daughters were not here, but just to make sure that somebody does, or you also checks on your neighbors. I am negligent. I don't do that enough. and just to making sure that they're safe, that neighbor to neighbor, community member to community member. It's one of the worst things about COVID, I think, was the isolation and that it caused. And I think we just need to ramp this up and just become more engaging with our neighbors, just as you said. So I think I will end at that, since I think you have taken all my talking points. So, but
I thank you. It's truly great that the state has now got an office which is prioritizing these sort of cascading disasters that we have. And, you know, I'll certainly have a lot of questions about how we can tie in with that and make that happen. So our next speaker, M. Johnson, is one of my local heroes. She joined Community Environmental Council just a year or so ago. She directs, as she said, her climate resilience program, whose role really is to enable the entire Central Coast area to respond to, deal with, adapt, and actually thrive in the face of the too many climate disruptions that we've experienced, certainly in my lifetime here and in recent years. Prior to CEC, M was executive director for 5 years of New Koyama's Blue Sky Center, and I recommend you check it out on the website, where she fostered creativity and innovative investment into the Koyama Valley, sort of a lost sister of Santa Barbara, the other side of the mountains. And one of her goals was to depoliticize the climate change issue by bringing urban and rural populations together, which on a personal note, I think is something we have to seriously think about nationally, locally, electorally. There are a lot of farm workers, service workers in the field who don't have air conditioning and who are out there every day. So M, let's welcome M. Johnson.
Thank you so much, and very honored to be here with all this wisdom today on this panel. And also, I'll note too something Yumi was mentioning about trusted messengers. One of those trusted messengers here locally is the organization CAUSE. And CAUSE is a core member of the Central Coast Climate Justice Network. If you're not familiar with that, you can check that out on CEC's website. And CAUSE will be deploying a lot of this really amazing, robust sets of resources that's coming out of the heatreadyca.gov website. So I'm here to really bring that perspective of what we're doing here locally and regionally to address heat adaptation and resilience. One of the leading facts that really hit home for us here in the room is that our sister county of Ventura is the fastest warming county in the continental United States. Santa Barbara is second to that. So for those of us in this comfortable city of Santa Barbara, you know, marine layer environment, that can be kind of shocking sometimes. But, you know, it's as David's already mentioned, this is not something that is going to cool off anytime soon. So what have we done to date? Our team, you know, trying to respond quickly and really gather the most innovative minds on this issue. Since December, we've already convened and coalesced 15 separate partners throughout Ventura County, Santa Barbara County, and San Luis Obispo County. These partners range from cities, counties, public health, and as well as grassroots organizations and community-based organizations, all committed to working together collaboratively to create an adaptation plan and vision for our Central Coast communities. And of course, heat action planning takes time, and so in the midst of heat action planning, CEC is also committed to uplifting community initiatives and resources and services that address heat right now. Something I wanted to say before we jump into those projects is how we work together. And so I think this is one of the most innovative parts about CEC. What drew me to work here is the fact that we have this 50-year track record of advocating for and creating opportunities for inclusive planning processes throughout the Central Coast. And recently, because I'm writing a number of grants related to adaptation right now, we've had to put into words, what does that process look like? How do we involve community members at scale, and how do we create inclusive planning processes? And I came up with this 3-part approach. So basically, number 1, our successful community engagement looks like participating frontline community members are designing the priorities, actions, and solutions that we undertake regionally. Community Environmental Council's role during that time is to provide capacity to those and to facilitate those conversations, evaluate and guide strategies based on the plethora of experts and regional organizations that we're partnered with, and also propose solutions to overcome barriers to implementation. And then we involve government agencies. And so we believe that government agencies should have protocols in place that align community priorities with their existing plans. And if they don't have that protocol in place, CEC's role is to support them in developing that. So I think this 3-part approach really is something to note, because when we're thinking about heat resilience, it's really coming down to an all government, all organization, all hands, solution-oriented, necessary action to take. So thinking about some of our core and aligned projects that we already have into place, right now CEC is directly working through home energy providers to basically stack incentives and tailor outreach to homeowners so that they do not have to navigate that complex landscape of rebates and tax credits. So for instance, right now we are working with groups like 3C who is the Tri-County Regional Energy Network, which collaborates across San Luis Obispo County, Santa Barbara County, and Ventura counties to provide energy efficiency in our region. So in particular, the types of incentives 3C REN offers is towards systems like heat pumps, HVAC systems, and heat pump water heaters. So you can think of anything that reduces gas or electricity use. There's an incentive. If you can go back, please. Thank you. Sorry, I wasn't looking. There's an incentive that 3C REN can offer. So they're already stacking some important incentives. You can see here they're already stacking some of those state Tech Clean California incentives, as well as our Central Coast Community Energy incentives, known as 3CE. You might see those sometimes on your utility bills. And in particular, they enhance incentives, you can see there on the right, that can range in the $4,000 or more region for residents whose primary language is not English, who own a mobile or manufactured home, or are CARE or FARA eligible. So that's eligible for reduced utility rates. And in addition, in Ventura County, some of those specifications to get this enhanced incentive model means that community and homeowners must meet that Senate Bill 535 disadvantaged communities designation. So if you can think about CEC's role in groups like this and services like this, it's beyond just supporting their already existing incentives and outreach services, but it's also considering what is in the best use and in the best availability for that end consumer or that homeowner, and that's what CEC does best. We look around this complex landscape that is trying to move as fast forward as we can to this net zero carbon future, and we start to think, what can we do to really address, like, what is the most impactful thing a homeowner is feeling right now? So I wanted to touch a little bit about something that we don't have funding for right now, but these are the conversations I have regularly that really fuel me and create a lot of feelings about what we should do politically. So for instance, in Ventura County, I've been in conversations with our fire safe councils there who are saying what we need are homes to be hardened and to be weatherized so that communities that are already in the wildfire risk zone are adapted to that future. And they're also saying we want to do that for communities most vulnerable. At the same time, County of Ventura's public health has had this huge need and request to address air quality in those same communities. They're recently working on piloting this dashboard system that overlays zip codes with their wildfire risk, their air quality risk, as well as their heat risk. And what you can see already from that pilot is that those zip codes are the same. So they want to install air purification systems in those homes and in those residents in those zip codes. 3C RIN, as we saw, has those incentives for heat pumps. Just this year, just recently in the last month, their $50 million 5-year budget tripled. They have $55 million to deploy these incentives. So the idea CEC is working on is, in the middle of all that, is there a way that we can create a resilient home where the end user can access all of those at the same time? So that's a little bit more about how we think about utilizing these services. But I want to move over to addressing another program that we've been taking a leadership with this past year, which is uplifting community resilience hubs. So also known as climate resilience hubs or community resilience centers. This has been another solution that's gotten significant state funding just recently to really deploy and scale up this solution, which if you were to put it into terms of what we see, I would say it's better than a cooling center, but not as great as creating a resilient home for everyone. So what I mean by that is when cooling centers are utilized by the state, we can just pause here for a second. So when cooling centers are used by the state, it's the Office of Emergency Management calling up a county or state or city-owned agency and asking them to be utilized as a cooling center during that time. So that's often in a library or in a large community space, whereas a community resilience hub is more focused on taking existing neighborhood centers, community-based organizations oftentimes, or even private agencies who already have the trust of their community and already are providing programs and services that the community relies upon, and training those staff members to be able to be utilized when an emergency hits, such as heat or such as flooding or the drought or wildfire. But it also continues to build capacity for that existing organization and retrofits their facilities to be energy resilient, meaning that when a power outage happens, this facility would be a centralized resource base for people to go to find cooling, to find places to charge their medical devices, and to be. So this is a really unique model, and there's a lot of really wonderful communities that we're already working with where this is a solution. So we're working with the East Side Library Franklin Neighborhood Center, owned by the city of Santa Barbara in that East Side district. We're working with the Girls Inc. of Carpinteria, down in Carpinteria, to be one of these pilot institutions. And we're also working with the Blue Sky Center in Nucuyama, as Rich mentioned, which is all of these places have really unique, social assets and are, isolated in their own unique place-based way. So this is one of those programs that we're really trying to scale up right now. We really envision through our partnerships that we have and institute community resilience hubs in our most vulnerable communities as fast as possible. And that's what we're working on, and we're really trying to generate as much funding as possible to support these communities to create resilience hubs. So I wanted to, my call to action today, or something that's worrisome to me, is that some of these solutions that have been lifted up and been powered by the state, this slide was put together actually earlier this year after after the budget cuts at the governor's office, and this was the kind of the package, the climate resilience package that was promoted and lifted up and created all of this new unprecedented funding, something we've never seen before as in the world, really, this type of large amounts of funding, and it gets really exciting. So we're quickly trying to mobilize community members and networks to be applicable and competitive to really access, unlock this types of resource for the Central Coast. And, because of, I don't know, but there's been a lot of budgetary changes, and this type of package is definitely at risk in the new proposed climate bond. So recently at the California Adaptation Forum, I found out that, if the climate bond, the way that it's structured right now, passes, this type of funding you could see dramatically decrease to, say, that community resilience centers funding cuts back all the way to $50 million from what it increased to, which was $100 million this year. Heat also is shared in that bucket. So basically over 80% of that climate bond would go towards things like wildfire, clean energy, and natural solutions, flood protection, et cetera, all these great things. But only 3% of the Senate bill climate bond would be shared between heat, community resilience hubs, and urban greening projects. So there's a lot of climate justice groups out there that are pretty worried about that percentage being dropped so low, because these are the types of solutions that are being uplifted in our community, and as CEC mentioned, those are the solutions that we need to prioritize and create protocols for implementing. And so this is definitely something that I hope, as a community we can uplift, that these priorities have been, determined by our community, so we need to ensure investment in them going forward. And I look forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Heat is not quite on the agenda yet, statewide or anywhere-wise, unlike fire, earthquakes, and so on. So we have our work to do, I think. So our final two speakers are both fearless grandmothers, and I'll say a little word about each of them. So Pam was born and raised in Santa Barbara and worked as a librarian for the Santa Barbara Public Library System. In addition to being a fearless grandmother, she also serves as a fearless member of 350 Santa Barbara. That's the national environmental organization. She's on the steering committee. And she tells us that she is happiest as a climate activist when she has a paintbrush in hand, using arts and skills for artivism, which is a great concept. Maureen lives on the Mesa. And in addition to being a fearless grandmother, she serves as a CEC certified climate steward and a board member of the Santa Barbara Ventura chapter of the Sierra Club. She's a passionate activist for climate action and voter rights, hoping to make the world a resilient place for her grandchildren and for future generations. And if you haven't studied it, their beautiful quilt that they've made is over there on the wall. So let's hear it for our fearless grandmothers. I think of myself as a fearful grandfather, but that's another story.
Thank you. Good evening. So as Rich said, there's a quilt here. And we'll show it up on the screen, but you may not be able to see it so closely. So as you leave, you might want to take a look at it a little more. The Fearless Grandmothers created the quilt, and it's all about solutions to the climate crisis and actions that we can take as a community and as individuals. So we're going to start with a short video that explains the quilt and the mission of the grandmothers. In March 2022, women from the Society of Fearless Grandmothers Santa Barbara created a quilt.
The grandmothers are deeply concerned about the kind of future we are leaving to our grandchildren. As a climate scientist, I have known for years what would happen if we didn't take action to stop global warming. For years, I've been preparing for this time, and it's happening faster than many predicted. The story of the quilt began when Catherine came across a beautiful French poster, The Roots of Resilience. I love this poster. It shows what we need to do to build resilience and create a better world for our children and grandchildren. We wanted to translate the ideas into English and to make it readable from a distance. We thought a quilt, a traditional American folk art, would be the perfect way to illustrate the many ways that people can take action. More than 30 women created pieces of the quilt. Each root shows the values we need to protect ourselves and our environment. Each branch shows how we can build a better future. Each leaf shows things that are already being done in our local communities and actions that anyone can take. Find what you love. Use your skills and talents. We need everyone to join in to regenerate our environment and reconnect to Mother Earth and each other. Working together, the grandmothers created a quilt in a few weeks to display at Earth Day in Santa Barbara. Just imagine what we all can create if we work together to protect our climate and our children's future.
Ideas and suggests the paths that we all need to take to protect people, climate, and ecosystems. Looking at the quilt through the lens of what we need to do about heat, if you look at the right side of the quilt, and you can do it in person later, there are quite a few leaves with heat solutions. Insulate buildings, build resilient centers, plant shade trees, reimagine urban spaces, we're doing that here, electrify everything, heat pumps, battery storage, microgrids. A lot of physical stuff needs to be planned, financed, and built. It's really a huge undertaking, and to do all this is going to take a lot of cooperation. On the left side of the quilt, take a look at the root cooperation, leading to the branch, building community. And here we are at the Community Environmental Center, helping create a community of people who are informed about climate and heat issues. There are vitally needed actions that anyone can do to help strengthen our communities, as Yumi said. Get to know your neighbors. If you don't already, learn more. And join a climate group. There's a group for everyone. Lastly, look at the branch in the lower left corner, the root, resistance. And it leads to the branch, stop destruction. This is the main focus of the grandmothers. We must address the chief driver of the climate crisis, the greenhouse gas emissions caused by the production and burning of fossil fuels. So here we have actions like phase out fossil fuels, divest from banks funding fossil fuel projects, divest CalPERS and CalSTRS pension funds from fossil fuels, and protest. And now Maureen is going to say more about actions.
Thanks, Pam. The Fearless Grandmothers are focused on worldwide climate emergency. We are in an emergency. We've been very good tonight talking very specifically about heat, but heat comes from a very specific place. And we're actively protesting against the destruction of the world as we know it, caused primarily by fossil fuels and greenhouse gas emissions. This is a pivotal year in the fight for a phase-out fossil fuels. Heat waves, pollution, and extreme weather all point to the fact that the climate crisis is upon us now. If big oil is allowed to continue drilling and burning more fossil fuels, the climate crisis and extreme heat will only get worse. So the question we want to address with all of us in the room together is how can we, either as individuals or as a group of fearless elders, make a difference? How can we demand change? And how can we help collaborate to make our community more resilient, both at an individual level and as a larger part of the action? Every member of the Fearless Grandmothers has been trained in how to support nonviolent actions to make issues known and to demand change. And we are inspired by many climate activists, including Greta Thunberg, Bill McKibben of 350.org and Third Act, as well as California groups like the Last Chance Alliance. We also believe that the future of our world is on the shoulders of our young people. So we work closely with youth from UCSB and from the Sunrise Group. We recently supported them in a chalk art protest during Film Festival on State Street, a sunset protest in Isla Vista, and several marches supporting Fridays for Futures movement, holding global climate strikes across the world in over 7,500 cities and supported by 14 million people, all led by youth activists. During COVID, when it wasn't safe for us to bring large groups of people together, the grandmothers devised a plan to hold several shoe strikes at the county building, at the beach, in front of some of the big banks that fund big oil, using pairs of shoes. Over 1,000 pairs were collected from folks across Santa Barbara County to represent the people who had wanted to be there. Recently, on June 29th, we partnered with the Last Chance Alliance and organized a sail to the oil rigs, a beach rally, and a paddle out at West Beach. Local organizations included CEC, the Environmental Defense Center, Sierra Club, Surf Riders, Channel Keepers, and Heal the Ocean. They all participated in urging Governor Newsom to stop permitting new oil here in California. Even closer to home, we are in a never-ending battle to keep Santa Barbara County land, waters, and people safe. ExxonMobil continues its push to restart the old corroded pipeline that caused so much damage here in our home in 2015. There is a county supervisors meeting scheduled for next Tuesday, August 22nd in Santa Maria on this issue. If you can go in person, that would be amazing. But if you can't, you can register to speak via Zoom. We also have letters on the back table next to the quilt to each of the supervisors. We strongly encourage you to go back there, sign one to each of the supervisors. We are going to deliver these, hand deliver these to the county office so that they can see that we care about this issue. We're also working with local organizations, as Pam talked about, church congregations, volunteer and student groups to assist them in finding ways to collaborate on, and support resilience in their communities. We use the quilt to help us in these discussions. The question is, what can you do? You can start the work of creating groups of your neighbors and or others that you have a relationship with to support each other, not only for extreme heat events and power outages, but for other climate emergencies. Getting engaged in this work is really easy once you get started. And in many cases, this work can be done from your home using remote meeting tools like Zoom. Educate yourself and others by sharing information widely and start a phone chain, or how about a door knocking chain in your neighborhood? Sign up for Community Emergency Response Team Training, called CERT for short. It's available in all our communities, local communities, including Santa Barbara, Goleta, Isla Vista, and others. Courses are also offered by the food bank. Write letters, respond to calls to action, and join postcard or phone bank campaigns. Join climate environmental groups, as Pam said, like 350.org or Third Act, which is a group for people over 60. Sierra Club, and of course the Gray Panthers and the Fearless Grandmothers are always looking for members. We're so very, very lucky to live here in Santa Barbara and in California. We can see that the climate emergency is causing unlivable levels of heat this summer in huge parts of our country and around the world. If you think that here in California we're doing all the right things, so there's nothing you need to do about it, or you don't have to think about things, or you don't think you can affect change as an individual, just think about that corroded, damaged pipeline, or the people who are breathing in toxic fumes in their homes or where they work. You can make a difference. A lot more information is posted on our website, which is right up there in the corner, Fearless Grandmothers of Santa Barbara. And now Pam and I would like to invite you to stand up and participate in a climate action, whether it be your first or your last. You are only, it's a call and a response. You're only responsible for the response, okay? It's one line. I think you guys can do it. Stand up and fight back, okay? Ready? When the air we breathe is under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back.
When the water we drink is under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back.
When our climate is under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back.
When our children and our grandchildren's future is under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back.
What do we do?
Stand up, fight back.
What do we do?
Stand up, fight back.
Woo!
Not a lot to say after that. So that was great. The Great Panthers was formed by Maggie Kuhn back in the 60s. You know, many of you remember those days. Just a couple of comments. We're going to kind of reformat things. I was going to have 10 minutes of discussion with the panel, but we're already, running late. So I'm just going to open it up to the audience. I want to make a couple of just points, something that occurred to me. One is you mentioned that the quilt was conceived and presented first on Earth Day. It's important to know that Earth Day originated because of the 1969 oil spill in Santa Barbara, which really galvanized the environmental movement, really created it nationally, and Senator Gaylord Nelson the following year declared Earth Day. So Santa Barbara has a long and storied history here. One other suggestion is the handout on your chair contains a link to all sorts of useful websites that you can go to. I think you can go to the CEC website and just click through there. And the final suggestion I'll make, just to repeat what you said, is sign up. Sign up for CEC, sign up for Fearless Grandmothers, sign up for Great Panthers, sign up for Clue, and you'll get plenty of information about things to do coming down. So having said that, if you have a question, raise your hand, and our excellent people will put the microphone on you and direct your question, if you want, to a specific panel member or in general.
Hi, my name is Craig Lewis, and I grew up in Santa Barbara, and I had a fearless grandmother. In fact, I was just looking for a photo, and I found it. I'm going to show you two afterwards. I was out protesting the oil on the Stearns Wharf, right? They used to do oil operations off the wharf. I've got a little protest sign with my brother and sister, and that spirit in my family originated with my grandparents, so I love that spirit. I also am the founder and executive director of a very technical nonprofit organization called the Clean Coalition. We are experts in solar microgrids and solar-driven community microgrids. We facilitated all the solar and solar microgrid projects at the Santa Barbara Unified School District. We've got a dozen other projects going on in this region, and we've got lots of stuff going on around the rest of the state, the rest of the country. My question is, I saw localization, loved seeing it. I saw local batteries on your chart, no solar, that was a big miss. I heard a lot about solar from you, David, and I'm hoping that, Naomi, you can bring back to the state the importance of having local solar. It is critical. Batteries don't create energy. Batteries store a little bit of energy. Lahaina, they did not turn off the power lines, even when they blew down. It was insane. That's what started the fires. That's why those fires spread. That's why Lahaina is no longer there. And over 100 people are dead. So you have to have local energy in order to have resilience. Batteries give you resilience for maybe a day. We're talking about long-term outages, and Santa Barbara is at risk for multi-month outages because the transmission lines here. The only way to get that kind of resilience is solar. We're not going to do it with diesel. We're not going to do it with natural gas. We have to do it with solar. So local solar is critical. There's a lot of attacks on local solar from the state. The state is kind of kowtowing to the utilities. Utilities don't want local solar. We need to correct that. We need to make sure Governor Newsom, the CPUC, CAISO, California Energy Commission, that they understand we need to make sure we're incentivizing local solar. And so, Naomi, I'm going to be talking with you in particular. You're my most important target in this room. We've got to get the state really aligning with local solar. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Well, I'm going to just finish with the comment and let somebody else ask the next question.
But if I can convert your statement into a question, what can be done really to move the state on this issue?
I don't have an answer. Yeah.
I will just say we are working with lots of local solar companies like yourself, and actually we have a table back there. Juan's at that table. He's waving his hand. If you want to talk about incentives with him after, you can as well.
Other questions over here?
Good evening. Maggie Sanchez, Doctors Without Walls, Santa Barbara Street Medicine. Absolutely loved the whole slide about the CEC hub, but what's your backup plan if there's a pandemic? What good is the hub if people can't go to the hub? What happens if the pandemic happens in the middle of summer and the heat is going off and we've got 6,000 people in our county who are unsheltered and have absolutely nowhere to go because there's mandates in place and nobody can do anything. So I would have really appreciated if your slide had had also some sort of indication on what your backup plan for a pandemic might be.
That's such a good question. And actually, just recently came up just this morning. We were sending some of our heat resources to our HR team and that kind of discussion started happening of how can we look into the future based on what we've just experienced together. And one of those, that's also a pretty serious issue when it comes to cooling centers and community resilience hubs as well, which are also hubs, right? Also community resilience hubs for gathering and centralizing resources. And that's why I really stand by what I said earlier when I said, I think community resilience hubs are better than cooling centers, but not as great as making every home resilient. And I think that is a really big focus of multiple teams here at CEC, and something that we feel strongly that we need to push forward just as strongly as we are to centralize resources for those populations that need to go to a centralized place. So thank you for making that really great point.
Anyone else on the panel want to respond to that?
All right. I'm just going to say one more thing. Public awareness around homelessness. Just remember that when you cannot access sunscreen, dirt does a really good job of protecting people from the sun. So when you see someone who's dirty and hasn't had a shower, there might be a really good reason why they've not taken a shower. And it's probably because they're trying to protect themselves from the harm of the sun. So just have some compassion in your heart when you see somebody who has not had an opportunity to take a shower. There might be a really good reason why.
And if I could just add that what the gentleman said about it has to be on a very local level. We have to be able to generate our own life-saving electricity on a local house by house or series of houses, a microgrid kind of level, because the climate centers, the hubs are useful, but they can't address all the potential scenarios.
We've had a number of questions come in on Zoom, so we're going to take a little pause here so that the Zoom room folks can have a say as well. So here's a question from Zoom. Are there services that will provide seniors free or low-cost transportation to cooling centers?
I can address that locally. That was actually when we were researching what services exist and where are the gaps in those services last year in our Central Coast region specifically. When it came to the impacts and pitfalls of cooling centers, one of those pitfalls was transportation to cooling centers. And I'm sure if any of you all saw some of those articles that came out about cooling centers, there was a lot of articles in LA specifically. Some of those even addressed those same barriers in some of these larger metropolitan areas. When we were identifying potential pilot community initiatives, something we were thinking about is, can groups that already serve transportation services for vulnerable community members, groups like Easy Lift, who are great services here locally and already have those trusted companions, could we work with them to develop a heat awareness so that they do welfare checks on those folks and help them get transported to cooling centers if needed? That was one of those, innovative ideas that we had, and that could be replicated. That could be a solution here that could be taken away from today.
And sort of a follow-up to that, are there any plans for mobile cooling centers? Like you mentioned Easy Lift, which they probably have nice air conditioning in those vans. Is there any plan for something like that?
Yes, Red Cross actually has been piloting some of these mobile units. I know the city of Santa Barbara recently, released, I don't think it provided cooling services, but it provided mobile medical supplies and charging services. And when it comes to utilizing a Resilience Hub program through state agencies, that's something I'd like to see, and something we advocate for next year is to take these community-led ideas such as mobile community resilience hubs and ensure that we can back them with some of the state climate resilience funding.
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. Following up on Dr. LaBelle's early comments, I think that the most urgent need for seniors and other vulnerable populations is to get air conditioning into our housing. And so my question is, are you aware of the legislative efforts either on the state level or the local level to require retrofits of existing housing, not to mention requiring air conditioning in all new housing units? I thought I heard Karen Bass talk about an effort in LA to require retrofitting, and that's come up against a lot of landlord and property owner opposition. But those kinds of legislative efforts I'm asking about.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I don't have the legislative numbers at my fingertips right now, but I'm aware of that came up and then didn't get passed, and that maybe it, in the future that is some policy action that we might see with maybe some improvement on the original statements. And so I think that right there, if people want to look into that, that's a great climate action to mobilize around, because that one has a lot of different stakeholder impacts and would require some really strong community-led response and feedback on how to deploy that.
I think Dennis here had a...
Yeah, and state level as well, yes.
Right, Dennis Allen here, he had a question.
Thank you, Kathy.
And maybe an answer to that also.
I'm a big fan of solar and battery backup, and microgrids and battery backups are the only way solar continues to function and supply electricity to buildings during the brownout. So the two have to go together. But all of these things, as we move more towards electrification, require an enormous amount of resources and a lot of rare earth minerals. And I wonder whether CEC or the grandmothers or the great Panthers are focusing it all on our cutting back on resources. Our country uses more per capita than any other part of the world. We're the privileged part of the world. And these resources can be cut back by smaller buildings, tighter buildings, consuming less. You know, we're all part of the problem. And so, you know, we need to start focusing on how we personally start doing less and our program start, and it would bring us closer into equality with our less advantaged populations in the county. So what are we doing?
Right on.
Also, sorry, Dennis, we'll definitely get back to that, but we actually have another staffer here who could answer some of the legislative questions that were brought up. Oh, you have a question. Oh, okay. Sorry. I was going to be like, here's the mic. Okay. So thank you, Dennis. I think, okay, perfect.
Hi, my name is David Landecker. I've been standing up and fighting back since the 60s like everybody else in this room, and look where we are. One of the things I did in that effort was to put solar panels on my roof. And I've now found out that because I already have solar panels, I don't qualify for any of the programs that exist here for batteries or for ways to use that solar more effectively. I wonder why that is, number one. Number two, whether there's anything to be done about it. And I was also really interested in the car that you might be able to buy that gives you a battery. That would be a nice thing. But it's a big problem, and it's incredibly expensive to add batteries at this point. Thank you.
Hi, this is Maureen. On the battery thing, I actually have been doing research. Well, let me, under full disclosure, my daughter works for Ford on the electrification strategy for professional vehicles. So, but I've been looking at bi-directional charging, and most of the electric vehicles that are coming out, not all, have the capability, but they're going to have to build it out in a way that's easy for us to be able to use it. It's already on, and this is not a commercial for Ford, so just ignore the Ford part. It's on the Lightning, which is the F-150, and what they found, and they also have it on the regular F-150 trucks. Down in Texas, when they had the ice storms a few years ago, people could live off of their truck battery for 3 days. So there are ways to do that, and I think that's a really relevant and important reason why we need to think about how we also get people the ability to be able to afford to buy an electric car.
I love the idea of everybody buying an electric F-150 truck. That's right.
My daughter would love it.
We only have time for a couple more questions, but I would like to get to a couple more from Zoom. And this one's directed to Dr. LaBelle. You mentioned that people with sleep apnea can get a free backup battery, and they're asking how they find out more about that.
I don't know. But actually, a lot of the questions, great questions here. I don't know the answers to a lot of this. I just have a friend who was able to qualify. I did see a survey, I think, from Southern California Edison, where they asked, do you have any medical problems? Do you need refrigerated medication? Do you have sleep apnea? And I suspect that's part of how that can happen. But I don't know exactly how it happens.
Okay. SGIP, just saying it for the Zoom audience. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, I think there was, did you have a question? We'll have one more. Okay, you'll take us home.
That program information is available on cpuc.ca.gov. Yeah. Dr. LaBelle, just in the opportunity to work closely with emergency managers, as well as with local community-based organizations, I'm super interested in sort of the citation that you had around cooling pods. As we look at emergency response and sort of, resources generally and targeting those to those that sort of need to be saved, if you will. How do we build some of that local level resilience we're talking about? Have you seen a particular organization locally that's attempted to map that, perhaps, or host a type of activity to try to get down to that level of organization or sort of asset identification, or anything in that space that you think is interesting that might be worthwhile to replicate?
I don't know, but just at this event, I met two people who do. There's a woman back there who seems to be working on a project to get very granular information about heat and the impacts on the elderly. And I think the woman from KEYT was talking about these relatively portable cooling sleeping bags and devices that can be brought into a place that needs heating, and this is the first I heard of it. So I think there are things out there, and I just don't know the details. But I'm excited that there's hope.
Any other questions from the audience? I've been told. So, right. Well, let me just say this. First, this has just been a great event. Many great ideas have been vetted here. But I think the real challenge is now to do something, and it requires people to mobilize. This issue of heat is really not on the radar. There's no mandatory heat warning system like there is for fires and things like that. There's no really emergency preparation for it. There's a lot of talk. I don't think at the county or the city level or the state level at this point. So if you're mobilized to do something, follow the example of the fearless grandmothers or the Gray Panthers. There's time for activism. And that means showing up at supervisor meetings. That means showing up at city council or the various city councils. That means getting in touch with Monique Limon, our state senator, our rep, or Greg. It means being active and doing something. So I hope this will inspire you all to take this issue seriously. Thank you all for coming. There's still food left over, so. Right.